numbers, Mr. Ford would probably be hard pressed to win a majority. You do need to hit 40. I think it's a little higher for the Conservatives because they tend to get much larger margins in some of the rural and small town ridings across the province, and the ridings where they did very well in the last election in some parts of Toronto, in the Greater Toronto area, in Ottawa, where I am, were much closer. And so if the Liberals, who in our poll are actually ahead in Metro Toronto, they're competitive in the Greater Toronto area, if they are to hold those numbers, then Doug Ford would need to really win a larger margin province-wide in order to get that majority again.
A new poll finds Ontario voters are equally divided on whether the province is heading in the right direction or is on the wrong track. More than 6 in 10 respondents to an Abacus data poll say Premier Ford's performance has been excellent, good, or acceptable. 35% rank his performance as poor or terrible. When it comes to who would make the best premier, 35% say Doug Ford, 17% say Andrew Horwath, and 12% went with Stephen Del Duca. But if the election were held today, 36% of decided voters would vote PC, just 32% would vote Liberal, so not a very large divide, and 23% would vote NDP. The Greens would get 6% of the vote. The survey finds the cost of living, housing, healthcare, and taxes are the top concerns heading into the election, followed by the pandemic and climate change. 1,500 eligible voters took part in the poll from April 14th to 19th. The margin of error is 2.1%, 19 times out of 20. Joining us live tonight is Charlie Pinkerton, deputy editor at QP Briefing, and Alan S. Hale, reporter at Queen's Park Today. So, Charlie, let's start with you. Quite the divide. Either the province is headed in the right direction or on the wrong track, with Ford's own approval there at 35% as the choice for best premier. How important is that personal rating to pull the entire PC team over the top? That's an 18-point cushion he has.
Right. I do think it is a important part of the PC's, bid to win this upcoming election. I think, the Ford brand, and particularly that of Premier Doug Ford, is very strong. He is someone who's very recognizable. He's someone who's very well known because of his long career in politics, the career of his brother as well. So I think it does really matter how people feel about him particularly. I don't think the same can be said about the other two leaders without that same sort of personal draw and, personal strong feelings linked to them. I think the other parties will really have to produce more on the policy side, which really is supposed to be the whole point of this exercise that we call an election. So that's what I'll be looking for.
So, Alan, leadership preference aside, the race is tightening. According to this polling, if the election were held today, the Liberals have cut into the PC lead. What more do they need to do to close the gap here? As the poll says, potentially they are in striking distance.
Well, whatever they're doing, it's clearly working. So I'm sure they have a plan on what they need to do to close the distance. Because this really is an election that is the PC's to lose. I think with the one of the things we've probably learned about Ford in the past few weeks is that when the cards are down, he's ready to pretty much throw everything that he used to stand for to the wind. He's running like a liberal candidate. He's spending money left and right. Apparently, we got a number. It was about $10.9 billion on pre-election promises. So really, he is basically running as a liberal. So I don't know how much of a stretch it will be just to get people to come over to their side at this point.
We've definitely been seeing the election campaign isn't even officially underway, of course, but we've definitely been seeing all the party leaders out there really throwing some numbers around. So Ontario voters, though, are overwhelmingly concerned about the cost of living as inflation takes away more of our hard-earned money. And housing affordability continues to be out of reach for so many. Charlie, do you have any sense of which party might tackle these issues most effectively?
Right. Well, that's sort of a toss-up at this moment, particularly on the housing front. The PC government just passed a housing bill that disappointed a lot of experts, disappointed the opposition parties, as pretty much everything this government does. But, we've seen the NDP have released a housing plan. It has a lot of vague promises. the Liberals have not released a large housing plan with many solutions. So, particularly on that issue, I think that that's something that voters are looking to hear from the parties about desperately and about a lot. What has been put out there so far by each of them hasn't particularly impressed me. We have seen some interesting promises that seem like they could actually address the problems that this province faces from the federal Conservative leadership candidates. So I'll be interested as we get into the campaign if some of things similar to those are adopted by the parties provincially.
And of course, inflation is now at a 30-plus year high. Alan, as you mentioned in your last response, we've been seeing a lot of announcements, a lot of billion-dollar price tags, from Ford showing up at a host of hospital funding promises to today Horwath pushing universal contraception, and earlier this week, Stephen Del Duca pushing a handgun ban. Are those other issues enough to move the needle here, or is it really all about affordability, affordability, affordability?
I think affordability is definitely going to be the primary issue, but I think the problem for all these announcements is honestly, affordability is being impacted by global events, and I just don't know how much lever pulling at the provincial level is actually going to make any difference, which is probably why they're not running so much on affordability. There's a lot of talk about it, but not a lot of policy. Like the guns thing is not about affordability. The contraception announcement today was a bit about affordability, but It was something that cost $30 a month, according to Andrea Horwath. I've never had to buy birth control myself, so I don't know. But so we're looking at a lot of things that are sort of affordability adjacent, but not really about, changing the inflation at all, because I just don't know if the province has that ability to tamp down on that.
As you said, affordability is hard to tackle at the local, provincial level with, the war in Ukraine pushing gas prices up and the pandemic having an issue on supply chain. So, yeah, as you mentioned, a whole host of other issues that tie into affordability. Charlie, what's most important for the PCs? Where do you expect we'll be seeing Ford and the rest of his ministers the most when the writ does drop?
Right. I think it's going to be right just on the outskirts of Toronto, in that 905 area that, is known so well as being so important in elections. Really, I think that's where their fate lies in terms of if they can win a majority, they would essentially have to sweep many of those ridings. If they want to win a minority government, they would have to win many of them as well. If they are going to be bumped out of power, we're going to see those ridings all flip the other way. So I think it's probably a good bet that you'll see Doug Ford, many other higher profile members and others, other notable Conservatives circling around the outside of Toronto, but also the same other parties, because again, that's where victory and really the fate of the election lies, in my opinion.
So, Alan, same to you, but for the Liberals and NDP specifically, what turf will be most important for them as they hope to make gains here?
Well, to make gains, I think really it is the Battlefield 905 at this point. And we can see that in the poll that we saw, or some of the polling we saw earlier today, where it found that the race is even tighter than it is province-wide in the 905, particularly between the PCs and the Liberals. So really, it's all up to the suburban voters to decide this election. And I think that's probably the reason the PCs have been pushing so hard on highways and motorist things that motorists care about. And I think the Liberals have really just got to make the case that for anybody in that area that is maybe not particularly happy with Doug Ford's style or his substance or whatever, they need to make sure that they know that they need to go to the Liberals and not the NDP. Because honestly, that one of the parties has to take the anti-Ford vote, or he's going to win. And maybe we're starting to see that transition towards the Liberals, or perhaps something will change in the campaign. I really don't know.
All right, Battleground 905, as you said. Charlie Pinkerton and Alan S. Hale, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much.